What does healing from narcissistic abuse look like? What can people do when dealing with a narcissist? What is the connection between old souls and narcissists? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll discuss these questions which some of us may still suffer from. Before we go into it, support us by clicking the subscribe button below. Today we'll discuss it with Chris Wasco. Chris Wasco is a spiritual counselor, energy healer, and psychic medium. She works with old souls and survivors of narcissistic abuse. Welcome, Chris. So, what does healing from narcissistic abuse look like?
Healing from narcissistic abuse will really vary from person to person, but ultimately it is about healing the nervous system. We get into a pattern of responses and behaviors that are trained over time. And the most common are fight or flight. The other two are freeze or fawn. So it's recognizing what your patterns are, how you react, and learning that you are no longer in a situation of threat and where your safety is possibly at risk, or you feel your safety is at risk. And just, again, getting to that, those nervous system calming techniques to just recognize and train your body that you're at peace and you're safe.
Hmm. So, what are some traits of a narcissistic or a narcissist person so one should consider in the relationship in order to avoid a narcissistic abuse from the beginning?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wish it were that easy because,
Yeah.
first of all, narcissism is a spectrum. So you can have a narcissist that's on the covert side or on the overt side. And either way, depending on where the narcissist falls in, they often wear what is referred to as a mask. You know, they put their best selves forward and they're very charming and it's very hard to see. I mean, we all as humans have an element of narcissism to us that will, obviously vary from person to person. And I don't know if it's entirely possible to avoid them. It's more recognizing the certain traits. And usually what happens is there's these minor red flags that tend to go off in the beginning where you remember yourself taking pause, like, that's weird, or they'll have a sudden outburst, or suddenly become impatient, or snap, or they suddenly give the silent treatment. It just, again, these often are very quiet in the beginning. And once they've charmed you enough and you're really comfortable in the relationship, and then they start pulling these tactics, that's when it's a little more difficult to get away from because they're so good at making you believe that it's your fault, that you somehow had a hand in it. It is incredibly manipulative, and it really takes some training to see. And most people will recognize it over time. I mean, I can say even as an expert in narcissism, when they put on that mask, I don't always see it right away. I'm much faster at it now where I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing, but they're very good. It's really learning to trust your gut though, because the gut doesn't lie.
Hmm. So the next time when a person comes in a relationship with a load of um, rationalization to make me feel guilty, then I have to be careful that this is a narcissistic behavior. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
really. That's a really good way to put it. Anytime you're questioning yourself, you're questioning your sanity, because gaslighting is absolutely a thing in a narcissistic relationship. And usually we are attracted to narcissists because there's something about us that's requiring healing that is somehow wounded. So it's a trauma bond often.
Hmm. Um, so, what can people do when dealing with a narcissist?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What can people do when dealing with a narcissist?
I have to separate it by the type of narcissist. If you're dealing with an overt narcissist, this is somebody that can be extremely violent. A lot of people are like, when you are in a relationship with a narcissist, you have to have boundaries. But I believe when it comes to an overt narcissist, that one has to be careful, because a boundary to them can be looked at as a threat and they might become violent. So that kind of person, if you are up against an overt narcissist, someone where you are dealing with domestic violence or any kind of abuse of that nature, it's really finding a safe spot, safe people, people to reach out to. There's domestic violence hotlines, things of that nature, because your safety in those situations is key. If you are dealing with the more covert, manipulative type of narcissist, then that's the kind of one where boundaries are extremely helpful, because boundaries to any narcissist are going to be viewed as a threat. But that type of narcissist just will more likely throw a little bit of a tantrum, maybe try and put you down, make you feel bad about yourself, try to manipulate the situation. Also what they like to do is they'll ignore you for a while and kind of like to pretend like it never happened. So then they'll come back thinking, oh, well, time has passed, so you're going to forget about it. But part of holding to your boundary is, if you want an apology, or if you want to have a discussion about what happened so that it doesn't happen again, that's holding to those types of boundaries that you've structured, and recognizing that you're not being disrespectful by setting up boundaries. The boundaries are for you. They're not for them. So if they want to throw a tantrum, if they want to be upset, that's on them, and that's a reflection of who they are. But what happens to someone in that type of relationship, they can be made to feel bad, where they're like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the fight. It's not worth the aggravation, especially when dealing with a parent. If you have a parent that maybe that you worry like is not going to live much longer, so they'll just deal with it until the parent passes away. So there's so many different aspects that someone could be dealing with it, so many variables. But I find that boundaries are best, because that's you respecting yourself, and you can't expect a narcissist to respect you unless you're doing so for yourself first.
At the same time, you can recognize by the boundaries that if he or she will push you to the edge or no. So then you will realize, yeah. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Another question that I always have about narcissistic behavior and narcissist people is that where and when it forms this personality disorder. For example, is it the childhood abuse, or it is something genetics, or something later on in life happens that this person takes a narcissistic behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. So narcissism is a generational pattern, and it will evolve and change through each generation. And the reason why that happens is, I was raised by narcissists. Now, I swore to myself that when I became a parent, that I would not hit my children. And that became kind of like my hill to die on, if you will. And although I was able to respect that boundary for myself, I didn't realize all the other narcissistic tendencies I was having as a parent, because we can create a bit of tunnel vision for ourselves and just hold on to our worst memories of what we grew up with, and then make a decision, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to create change, which is wonderful. But we have to start to recognize where the narcissistic patterns are within ourselves, because they're there. They may not be exactly like our parents or our grandparents or great-grandparents, but they evolve based on what is going on in that generation. So when you look back during your generations, your lineage, if you will, you have to look at the points of trauma, the points of intensity. So it's really knowing your history of your family right? Like if you had a family member go through a war, if you have famine, depression, like the Great Depression, that is, or elements of depression, which can also fall into narcissistic patterns. And that is how these foundational elements were planted or replanted with each generation. Because if you look back in history, like let's just say you had grandparents that went through the Great Depression, or well, in this case, it's probably great grandparents, and maybe your grandparents were children. But then when your grandparents and great grandparents got older, then they would have gone through World War II. And then the next generation would have gone through the Vietnam War. And this is, American history, but, it's looking how these patterns become reinforced during times of intense trauma, of fear-based patterns, because narcissism is a fear-based belief system of having to somehow protect yourself, protect your family from this element of safety, and not realizing that you're treating people, you're treating your children, you're treating your loved ones as if you're under this feeling of threat when you no longer are. But again, this is what gets trained, and that is why it's a generational pattern. So it is not just one generation that can break the pattern. It takes at least two, because you need to reinforce it together and change the tendencies and recognize the tendencies first and foremost. So, how can you create change if you don't even see what's a problem? And a lot of times parents will notice the problems or hints of a problem when they hear themselves sounding like their own parent and they don't like it. When they find yourself, oh my gosh, I sound just like my dad, and you're just kind of cringing, that's a signal that there's something that's requiring change.
So this narcissistic behavior is something that nobody want to be or want to have. So this is also one of a kind of traumas that a person may have, which may suffer themselves, their children, and their loved ones. So how a person know if he or she is a narcissist?
That's a great question. It's, I think, narcissism, and if you talk to psychologists, psychiatrists, anyone who specializes in, any kind of human disorders, narcissistic personality disorder is something that is diagnosable. However, they find it so difficult to diagnose a narcissist specifically because so few of them go for help. Because it is very difficult for a narcissist, a true narcissist, to be self-reflective. So if you find yourself like looking in the mirror or getting to this place of self-reflection, I wouldn't say that that person would be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but they probably have some tendencies if they've come to the point where they're like, oh my goodness, am I a narcissist? What do I have to look at? Because like I said, we all have elements of narcissism within us. We live in a narcissistic society. So there's no, escaping it per se. But when it comes to the point where it is creating trauma, it is abusive, it's affecting our loved ones, that is when we have to look at those elements of what we can change, how we can change it. And I have yet to see a true narcissist look at themselves and say, oh, I really need to do better. They're too busy playing the victim and blaming others around them.
And here, a follow-up question I have is that as today, you said a lot of people want to be narcissists, even in a form or another. For example, they just want to be above others. They say, I'm unique, I'm special, which for me looks a form of narcissism, because we are all the same and we have to enjoy the same level as others. So the affirmations, the casting things that people are saying and feeling, showing off, these are a kind of narcissism behavior. Don't you think by the passage of the time they develop a narcissism behavior?
They can, absolutely. I mean, it really will depend on the circumstance and, what they're experiencing in life. the type of relationships they're forming. And, I do believe there are also elements to a personality. I believe that while some aspects of a personality is environmental and, depending on how you grew up and the type of people you grew up around, I still believe a lot of us are born with the personality we're meant to have. When you look at astrology and numerology and you kind of strip that down, you realize, oh yeah, I know exactly how and why you behave the way you do. So it is very interesting to see how some people are probably more predisposed to narcissism than others when you look at it that way.
Hmm. So, what is the connection between old souls and narcissistics?
At first, I was drawn to old souls because I am an old soul. And a lot of my work is working with old souls, working with people that have dealt with narcissistic abuse. And at first, I was separating the two. But anytime I was speaking to somebody that identified as an old soul, there was a narcissist somewhere nearby, and it was usually in the family unit. And anytime I was working with someone that was dealing with narcissism, there was an old soul nearby. And usually in that case, it was a child.
Hmm.
So I found that there was always this link, and most narcissists will have an old soul in the family, and that old soul is more likely than not to be the change maker, but it's not a foregone conclusion. They may go on to repeat the cycle. I believe that this has been going on for a few generations, because more often than not, the children are older souls than the parents anyway. But now, so many children are coming in not only older, but wiser in a way where they're like, this stops and we're creating the change and we're working to do that. So that's why we're starting to see so many people cutting off their narcissistic parents and just saying, enough, I'm done. So it has been a very interesting evolution in my own work, because I just thought I was helping people heal from narcissism or helping old souls understand that they're not a problem, because the narcissist and the old soul mix in that regard. The old soul in the family is usually made to feel like the problem. They tend to identify as the black sheep, and they're taught to evolve from this place, from this just deep level of hatred that comes into this. I mean, it does vary. I do work with a lot of teenagers, and they're kind of in this mix of, I don't want to be here anymore. They hate their family, they hate themselves. But I see like these layers start to shed as the traumas are unfolding, and not all of it's theirs. Some of it's their parents, some of it's grandparents, because like I said, this is a generational pattern. So it's been really interesting to see this change so much. And I think it's still going to continue, but there's just been this massive shift in this lifetime of old souls creating change and shifting the vibration of the generational line.
Hmm. So, how do we know if we have an old soul?
I usually find that it will depend on the personality. For me, I get a feeling. I'm just so used to it by now. But if you're not used to that feeling, then it's usually in personality traits. An old soul tends to be a bit of a loner. They tend to feel like they don't fit in anywhere. They tend to just learn to like their time alone, whether or not they want to be. Some appreciate being alone, others find it lonely. It really will depend. They tend to be very grounded in who they are. They know who they are, they know what they like. But they also recognize that that's not always a safe feeling. Like, let's just say, for example, they were a picky eater growing up. Old souls usually are picky eaters. And that was usually, criticized. Like, why don't you eat what I've made for you? So things like that. They tend to don't love school. It's too structured. They like to kind of do things their own way. They tend to be extremely creative, very intuitive. Uh, they tend to just know things and they can't always explain why. So really it's just, again, falling into these like personality traits that have just been so accustomed to what an old soul is and what they embody. And then when they kind of feel like they identify as that, and a lot of them are told it, like a lot of people that I work with, oh yeah, all these people used to always tell me when growing up, you're an old soul, you're such an old soul. So I feel like the ones that are meant to hear that, they're meant to hear it for a reason. I heard it a lot growing up. And at the time, I remember when I was like, that's weird. What does that mean? And now I understand why I needed to hear that. So that's a common element as well. So, but yeah, like I said, it's usually the personality traits and just that feeling of just who they are.
Mm. So another question that is the opposite of what you do. Can a narcissist themselves change or heal?
Change what?
Or heal?
Change or
Maybe
heal?
like to change the traits to come to normal.
It really depends on the type of narcissist. I've done a lot of research on this just from a psychology standpoint, and most psychologists and psychiatrists will say no. And if they've seen it, they've only seen it once or seen it come close. Uh, do I believe there's potential? Sure. Uh, but like I said, I don't feel a lot of them have the ability to be self-reflective because it comes down to them facing some pretty difficult traumas, and not many people want to do that. I can't say I blame them, especially if it was, the type of trauma you would rather leave in the past. But certain traumas we have to face in some way if we want to move forward and get past it because it's affecting behavior. But yeah, I have yet to see a narcissist that wants to heal or sees themselves as a problem. Because, like I said earlier, they just love to play victim and love to blame other people for their problems.
Exactly, as we experienced some criminals, they go through a pattern again and again and punish them and go to prison again and again. When they come, they really determined to change themselves, but they cannot help themselves to just help. They just this again happen by them. They cannot control themselves, their impulse behavior. So it means it is very difficult for them to change. You exactly. And so now tell us about your work a little bit. So how do you work with old souls and survivors of narcissistic abuse?
So I help heal trauma because I work with energy. I would call myself an energy healer. I do spiritual counseling. So in some cases, we're talking through stuff and I'm pulling out the stuff that has the stronger vibration energetically. I could connect to people's their systems, their chakra systems, and feel what's resonating, where the trauma is lying, if there are any blocks. And I give people energy techniques to work on healing those elements. And, as I started with just calming the nervous system and getting to that place where you recognize yourself as safe, where you recognize that you're surrounded by love, and getting to a process of self-love. That is not an easy road for someone that has been in any kind of narcissistic relationship, because you've been taught and trained to kind of hate yourself or feel that you're a problem. So those are a lot of the things that we start with. And what's been really amazing is a lot of my clients, as they heal, they start to open up to spirit. So they start to come into like clairvoyant gifts, clairaudient gifts, clairsentient gifts, because a lot of these gifts were kind of numbed because of the trauma. So that's been kind of this evolution through this process that I didn't expect, which has been really neat. It's how even I came into my own gifts unexpectedly. Healing from trauma opened me up to spirit in a way that I wasn't even looking for. And then all of a sudden I would start seeing people in spirit and like, oh, wow, who are you? How do I talk to you? So it's pretty interesting.
So some energies that are not even seen you are working with that as a healer, and you know
Yes.
how to do that. And what about yourself? If you just let us know a little about you, how did you survive? Like some people may relate and it will help a lot.
Yeah, for me, I hit a point of enough. And I cut off my parents. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. It started to affect my children. And and I gave chances that I probably even should not have given. My dad had hit one of my children, and that should have been my enough, but it wasn't. They got another chance after that, and uh, then they threatened my husband, and so or my dad physically threatened him. So that was my no more. I'm not doing this anymore. And I cut them off from my phone. I blocked everybody I needed to. My brother took their side. My sister kind of played on the fence for a while until my mother manipulated her enough where I had to stop talking to her too. So really, I had to come to a place where I was okay cutting off the family I was raised in. And it was the most difficult decision I've ever made in my life. But now here I am, 7.5 years later. My only regret is not doing it sooner because it changed my life. My first step after cutting them off was going to therapy because I needed to talk to somebody who specialized in narcissism and could really talk me through things I was experiencing. And, as my traumas were unveiling and revealing themselves in different ways, it was definitely helpful. And just little things along the way, I just started doing for myself, just a lot of practice of calming my own nervous system, a lot of connecting to myself, a lot of talking. And, I'm a pretty active person. So a lot of active practices, exercise, yoga, all those kinds of things. I changed my diet. And as I was making all of these changes, it was really just to heal myself. I wasn't on any type of journey spiritually, at least not that I was aware of at the time. But I wanted to be a better mom. I wanted to be good for my kids. I didn't want to be the kind of parent to them that I had growing up. So that was really my goal. And as I was doing all of these things, I suddenly started seeing people in spirit. And I would be talking to someone as I'm talking to you, and then I'd see someone right behind their shoulder. And I didn't know what was going on at first. So I ignored it, of course, because I felt crazy. And as it kept happening, I realized that I was opening up something. And so I started taking classes on psychic mediumship and developing my gifts and understanding that I did have a gift and I was able to talk to spirit. And then I just followed the path. And eventually that led me to Old Souls and helping them heal as I healed myself. And I guess that was maybe something I was destined for, but it surprised me every bit of the way.
So nowadays, as I see in psychology, MDMA therapy and a lot psychedelics and a lot of other kind of therapy, psychologists and psychiatrists, these people propose. So which one worked better for you? Spirituality or any kind of them or combination of them? So which one worked for you and which one do you recommend?
For me, it was definitely going the holistic path. So it started, like I said, with just talk therapy, and then I changed my diet. And around this time, I found Medical Medium and started following all of his books because I at that time had an autoimmune disease of my thyroid, and through using that, I healed my thyroid. And I think a lot of all, toxins I was consuming in my diet, I no longer was. So I was freeing my body more to heal. So I believe because of that, I was opening up spiritually. So even though I felt like I was healing my thyroid, I was healing so many more things. I was healing my chakra system, my energy body, my aura, so it really, again, cleared these channels for me. I believe we all have these channels available to us, and some of us are more blocked than others. I was certainly blocked because of my traumas of growing up, my diet. And like I said, the more I healed, these channels opened. And so I really believe it's what people are connecting to, because I don't feel you could force anyone to do one path or another. They really need to follow their own guidance system, because if anyone feels forced, they're ultimately not going to continue or not going to want to do it. And something about it is not going to work.
Hmm. Um, Before I talk to you, I researched a little bit on 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 narcissistic relationship, and then I came across something that if we are communicating with a narcissistic partner, then at the end you cannot just let go of them. Yeah, and most of the people, even my friends, when they let go of them, they were the one who want to go badly back to them, but the other party didn't want them back, and this caused a big issue, which I can call it trauma. And then those people dropped from a height of a business and social status. So what do you think about this?
Well, it is very true, because narcissists are very good at making one feel isolated and alone.
Mm.
And they make it very attractive to come back. It's why I went back. I mean, I've had people ask me, like, your dad hit your child and you went back? And it's the trauma. We become conditioned to go back because they make us feel like we can't survive without them, or that our lives will not be good without them. And it is very believable and very convincing. So to leave a narcissist or narcissistic relationship, you have to go through things that are very difficult and very scary, because it is unknown, and essentially not accept what they believe is true, in the sense of, you can't survive without me, because it's not true. You can. It just might be hard in the beginning, especially if you've been very reliant on that narcissist for quite some time. They're very controlling with money often. Financial abuse is a specific type of abuse that one might have to work through in that type of relationship. And then when you have other people that you essentially will shut you out, as I described, I don't have a relationship with my siblings because of my parents and how manipulative they are. And I had to make that choice. So sometimes a matter of healing ourselves does mean making some very difficult decisions. And it was really hard for me in the beginning. I will never take lightly what anyone is going through if they go through that type of process. And it is also why so many people don't want to leave, because it feels so difficult. For me, I had one of my aunts who had years earlier cut off my parents that I reached out to, and she was exactly who I needed at that time. And she said to me, it will be very difficult in the beginning, but it only gets better each year. And she was
Mm.
absolutely right, because as I said, here I am 7.5 years later, and I only wish I did it sooner. But I guess I wasn't ready yet. But when I was, I did it. And it was, like I said, best choice I've ever made. I found so much peace in my life, and I'm so grateful for that peace. And I will now fight for that peace.
Mm. So that is true that the narcissist themselves also suffers from this separation. But in comparison, what do you think? Who suffers the most? And how much they suffer after the separation?
I believe everyone suffers to a degree, because it's painful. Because usually when you're in a relationship with someone like that, there is a form of love. It may not be an organic type of love, but it has become a type of love that you understand as real and true. So
Mm.
you will feel that separation and the pain of that. And because a narcissist does have their good sides, that's the part you mourn. And that's also a lot of why people have a hard time leaving, because the narcissist is not all bad. They have some very wonderful attributes and sides to them. And it's the part of them that you do love and you do want to be around. But you really have to recognize you're not only with that side of them, you're with both sides, or all sides, depending on how many versions of themselves they have. And it's a matter of, do you want to subject yourself to that? Because they're usually very volatile of when that is going to change. You don't know. You just have to kind of brace yourself for it. Some people get very good at anticipating it with tells, but so just to get back to your question, I think everyone will have some form of suffering. I think it is also when it's hard to look at a narcissist as one that suffers because they can be so evil. But a lot of what that comes from is because they do want you in their lives. They do love you. Again, that's a very warped sense of love because a narcissist has been conditioned to see love very differently. It's controlling. It's not genuine. It's conditional. But still, it is their understanding of love. So you kind of have to look at it from that perspective. And it's also why they try so hard to keep you. It's why they want to control you. Love is control to them. So I wouldn't say one person suffers more or less, but it would depend on the relationship, especially if it's very abusive. So if someone is dealing with domestic violence, I believe that person is truly suffering.
So some of the narcissist people hate their partner or children, as you said, and then they rationalize it. They say that this is main. We came from a genetic to our primary reaction is to hit. Gently, they say. So what do you say? Is it an impulsive behavior that they can't control and then they rationalize it, or somewhat they are true? We are coming from a wild background, so we have to make ourselves better by the passage of each generation. What do you think?
I think in some cases it is impulsive, but oftentimes it's immature. A narcissist usually does not learn how to regulate their emotions, so they're stifled at a certain age. So you can have a full-grown person, like let's just put them in their 30s or 40s, that will still have a reaction like a 12-year-old child because their emotions are not regulated and they don't understand how to act like a human being with reasonable responses and reasonable reactions. So that is where the hitting comes in. It's, I'm upset, I'm mad, you've angered me, whack, because that is the trained behavior. So they ultimately would have to learn how to regulate their emotions, but it's going back to, are they going to be able to see that as a problem? And usually not.
So at the end, I just want to know that is this the biggest symptoms that we can see in a partner, and then the blaming game, or there is some other big symptoms or traits that we have to notice or consider when we want to check if our relationship is based on narcissism or not?
Well, the obvious ones are easier to see. So obviously hitting, bouts of anger, aggression, those are easier to be able to say, oh, this person has some problematic tendencies. It's the more manipulative behaviors that are challenging to see because those are subtle and quiet. But it's, again, coming down to regulating emotions and acting like a human being. So, something like the silent treatment, that's not an abusive by hurting somebody physically, but you're hurting someone emotionally because you're basically shutting down and saying that they don't matter and what they say doesn't matter. And you might likely be manipulating them to apologize for something that they did not do. It is very common for a covert narcissist to give a silent treatment and ignore the person until the person finally gives up and says, I'm so sorry. I just want this to be better. What can I do for you? And it works every time. That was my mother. My mother is an absolute expert at that. She would be mad and she would pout and she would ignore. And then if she got really mad, she would tell on me so that my dad would hit me. So he was used as a weapon or a tool. So that was the more manipulative ones are tougher to see because they're very good at making you feel and look like the problem. And they tend to be rather charming and have trained people to believe you're a problem too. So that's why a lot of people come out of narcissistic relationships thinking, oh my gosh, I must be a problem. And then they don't know how to, take the next step because they're like, well, what if it's fear? What if I attract another person like this? What if I am the problem? What if I sabotage relationships? It's such a mind game.
So they're lying as well, then, in general.
100% master manipulators.
So about your work, do you, as you focus mainly on energy, spiritual trainings and sessions, and is there any kind of meditation things? Because maybe people will refer to you, and at the end, I want you to just let us know about how they can find your work. First, yeah.
Yeah, so there are so many things you could do. A lot, I really like the emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. A lot of people work with EMDR, and that's really to go to individual trauma events to help calm the memory of that. There are many types of meditative techniques to help, kind of reprogram, as well as just learning to reparent yourself, doing inner child work. There's so many techniques, and I think it does vary by person of what to start with or how to start. But if someone is doing that on their own and taking that journey on their own, then I would say really just follow your guidance there. If you're led to a book, read the book, see how that guides you. If you feel you need to call somebody, do that. See why. There's somebody there that probably has a similar experience. If you feel the need to join some group, again, follow that guidance. It's you will be led. I believe we are led. It's subtle, but I was guided initially through books. I was just reading books about narcissistic parents, abusive parents, immature parents, and that was just at the library. I just found myself pulling books off the shelf and like, okay, let me go read this. And then I would be like, mind blown. Yes, that's exactly what my parents do. Oh my gosh, this is diagnosable. It was mind blowing to me because especially if you've been in such a relationship for so long, it's hard to see it as abnormal because that's your version of normal. So it's really quite a journey, and it's an individual experience. But as if anyone does want to reach out to me, I can be found online. My website is my name, chriswasko.com, WASKO. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Chris Wasko Medium. So if anyone wants to just follow my work there and see the kind of posts I put, I try to be inspirational and try and be informational as well, and sometimes just a little silly and fun.
Thank you. But before we say goodbye, I want to ask you one more question. What do you think if a person is narcissist? What is the difference between their view to the world and a normal person? Do they suffer? Do they have something that they cannot see the world as it is, or they just normally manipulate and get more than normal people? So it has a merit, or something is negative about them, or they are just. I know this is a disorder, but at the same time they manipulate and get. So what do you think about this? Are they normal in the society for themselves, or they don't see what is real?
I believe there's a little of both in there. I believe that in some cases, they might see a version of normal, meaning they see what we see, right? And then there's a version of that they just see things from a perspective of grandiose, where they look down on others. They're very prone to criticizing others because, again, they can't be self-reflective. So they're often criticizing everybody else and putting everyone else down and making jabs. And in some cases, it might just be very light sarcasm. But when it's repetitive, it's a problem because they technically are putting others down to make themselves feel better about themselves, but not realize that that's why they do it. They think they're being funny. And that can seem acceptable if they get a laugh out of it. So if they've been trained to get a laugh out of it, that's their version of normal. And then again, they'll just see it where they're not the problem, it's other people. Oh, you don't think I'm funny? Well, then you're too sensitive. So again, it's coming from this grandiose behavior of thinking you're better than others.
Thank you so much, Chris, for enlightening us and answering a lot of our questions.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the questions. These were great questions.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and see you soon.